Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a deeply fascinating, almost hidden contradiction in human survival. We're going to trace our journey from fighting off ancient, terrifying predators, where literally just finding breakfast was a life-or-death mission, to navigating our physically safe yet psychologically brutal modern world. Okay, let's dive right into this. I mean, think about it for a second. For the vast majority of us, our physical lives are incredibly safe today. We've got climate-controlled homes, secure food supplies, modern medicine, the whole shebang. Yet, despite all of this physical security, if you get excluded from a meeting at work, left unread on a text message, or just snubbed by a group of friends, your brain reacts as if a saber-toothed tiger is literally scratching at your door. You feel that tight ache in your chest. But why? Why are our brains still hardwired to treat a simple social snub as a lethal threat? Here's a quick roadmap for this explainer. 1. The evolution of survival. 2. Lifespan and the agricultural shift. 3. How modern medicine extends life. 4. Ostracism as social death. And finally, 5. The biology of social pain.
Part 1. The evolution of survival, moving past the Paleolithic era.
Let's start at the very beginning of baseline survival. For the Paleolithic hunter-gatherer, the world was entirely unforgiving. Early humans met their basic nutritional needs by foraging for hard-shell fruits and roots and hunting large game. They slept in tree branches or caves just to stay safe, and because they faced immense daily physical dangers, really high mortality from predators, wild animals, injuries, the population growth rate was incredibly slow. But here's the absolute coolest takeaway from this. Despite average lifespans being quite short due to those external threats, our species fundamentally already possessed the biological hardware for a long lifespan. In fact, our maximum life expectancy capacity actually exceeded 85 years even back then. We just rarely survived our brutal environment long enough to reach it.
Moving to Part 2. Lifespan and the agricultural shift. A step forward, a step back.
Now, you'd probably assume that settling down and inventing farming would immediately solve all our survival problems, right? Well, actually no. The Neolithic agricultural revolution was a massive shift. We went from moving around in small hunter-gatherer bands to building settled agricultural societies. We domesticated animals, cattle, poultry, and early companions like dogs and wildcats. But this created a really counterintuitive paradox. Settling down actually crashed our life expectancy to an estimated 20 to 33 years. Why? Well, because living in close contact with animals, living near our own waste, and the explosion of mosquitoes around agricultural water sources created an absolute breeding ground for infectious diseases. Plus, our diets changed drastically. We had more consistent food, sure, but it was much poorer in fiber, potassium, and magnesium, and way heavier in sodium and refined grains. So it was a clear step forward for civilization, but a massive step backward for individual physical survival.
Which brings us to Part 3. Modern medicine. Extends life. The dramatic upward trajectory. Of course, humans are pretty clever, and we didn't stay stuck in the mud forever. We eventually applied our collective brainpower to solve these physical survival problems. Looking back at the historical timeline, for thousands of years, global life expectancy barely budged. Even by the 1800s, it sat at an estimated 28.5 years. By the 1900s, it had only crept up to 31 years. But then, boom, explosive growth happened in a remarkably short window. By 1950, it jumped to 48 years, and in the 21st century, it reached 66 years globally. This dramatic leap was driven directly by the implementation of vaccines for diseases like smallpox and tuberculosis, and Alexander Fleming's discovery of penicillin in 1928, which finally stopped simple bacterial infections from being an absolute death sentence.
And the progress definitely didn't stop there. By 2019, life expectancy in rapidly developing areas took another massive leap. In Turkey, for instance, the average life expectancy hit 77.7 years. That is a staggering achievement. It really showcases our near-total triumph over those ancient physical threats that kept our Paleolithic ancestors awake up in the trees.
The data shows this massive, continuous upward trend so clearly. It's a steep climb from about 51.7 years in 1960 all the way to nearly 78 years in 2019. And remember, that isn't just a line on a graph. That represents millions of human beings who are no longer dying young from predators, basic infections, or starvation. And scientists project this number is just going to keep climbing globally. Looking ahead to the years 2050 through 2100, projections show countries like Japan and Switzerland pushing the boundaries of human lifespan even further, well into the 80s and 90s. Physically speaking, we are safer and living longer than any generation in the entire history of the genus Homo. All right, Part 4. Ostracism as social death, the invisible survival threat.
So we've successfully extended the lifespans of our physical bodies, but here's the catch. We haven't exactly updated our ancient brains. To understand this invisible threat, we really need to look at this through the lens of evolutionary psychology. This approach suggests that our psychological mechanisms evolved specifically to solve survival problems in our ancestral past. Remember those incredibly dangerous Paleolithic environments? Humans are deeply social animals. We depended entirely on our group to find food and stay safe from predators. If you became problematic and were ignored, excluded, or kicked out of your tribe, a process known as ostracism, you didn't just feel lonely. Being separated from the group literally meant death. Indefinite ostracism was, for all intents and purposes, social death.
And that brings us to part 5, the biology of social pain and why rejection physically hurts.
Because ostracism was an absolute, fundamental threat to our survival, nature strongly favored humans who could instantly detect when they were being excluded. Researchers wanted to see exactly how our brains process this today compared to a severe physical injury. So in a pretty compelling study, they asked participants to write in detail about an autobiographical memory involving either a severe physical injury or a deep social betrayal that occurred within the past 5 years. Let's look at a direct comparison between 2 real participant memories from that study.
First up, the physical pain. One participant wrote about a football tackle, saying, "I turned sharply and heard a pop. All of a sudden, I was in agonizing pain. I broke my fibula and tore the deltoid ligament." It's a completely visceral, awful memory of pain. But here's the really interesting part. When this participant recalled the event years later and they were asked to measure how much pain they felt right at that moment in the present, they felt zero current physical pain. The injury was entirely left in the past.
Now contrast that with a social injury. Another participant recalled an incident where their close friends passed around a hateful drawing of them back in the 8th grade. They wrote, "It was the worst betrayal I have ever felt. I felt like an idiot and foolish. I also felt very depressed and lonesome." When the participants who recalled deep social pain were asked how they felt in the present moment, a critical finding emerged. They actually re-experienced the pain in the present moment, simply by remembering it.
So what does this all mean? Well, brain imaging shows that social pain utilizes the exact same neural pathways as physical pain, specifically regions like the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex. When you are ostracized, your brain sounds the exact same alarm as if you've just broken a bone. But unlike a broken bone, social pain is unique because it can be continually re-experienced mentally. Our evolutionary ostracism detection system is so incredibly vital to keeping us in the group, and therefore keeping us alive, that it essentially forces us to feel social disconnection as literal, recurring agony. Because the cost of missing a social threat in the wild meant certain death, our brains evolved an over-detection bias. We basically have a hypersensitive ostracism detection system that is crudely overtuned for our modern world. Studies show this system gets triggered by minimal cues, like someone just avoiding eye contact with you. It hurts even when we're ignored over a text message or excluded in virtual online games. Astonishingly, researchers found it causes measurable psychological pain even if you are told the rejection was just a glitch initiated by a computer program. It even triggers negative affect if you're rejected by an outgroup you absolutely despise, like the Ku Klux Klan. The context almost doesn't matter to your ancient brain. To your brain, exclusion equals danger, period. And this brilliantly illustrates the great paradox of human survival. Science, medicine, and agriculture have given us the tools to live safely into our 80s, entirely free from the jaws of those ancient predators. We have conquered physical death to a degree our ancestors could literally never have imagined. Yet deep inside our incredibly secure modern lives, our deepest, most fragile survival instinct remains entirely unchanged. We are utterly wired to need each other. So I'll leave you with this to ponder. As our technology and our lifespans continue to stretch further and further into the future, will our ancient brains ever outgrow that primal, painful need to belong? Thank you so much for exploring this with me.